So good morning, sir. We are second year nursing student po from NJ201 and this is for our research subject po. I am Trixie Hernandez.
I am Rian Ginama po. I am Sandra Asla Johas.
Ayan, and we are here po, sir, to interview lang naman po about research po and about your knowledge when it comes to research. So first, sir, what is your name po?
Alright, I'm Ron Aveleda. I'm one of the full-time professor here at the PWU under the School of Nursing.
What are the subjects po that you teach po or yung tinuturo niyo, sir?
So, to name a few, I've been teaching, right now for this particular semester, I've been teaching, how do you call this, leadership and management for third-year students. And I'm teaching transcultural nursing also for third-year students. So, both for Section 1 and Section 2. I've been teaching fundamentals of nursing practice, the laboratory part. I've also been teaching microbiology and parasitology, both for laboratory and lecture. So those are the subjects that I'll be teaching, or I have been teaching.
Ilang taon na po kayo nagtuturo dito, sir?
So I've been teaching as a full time.
Yes, sir.
So I prior to this since 2020, but I'm teaching at the graduate school. But last year I accepted the position of full-time professor, concentrating my craft in undergrad.
So, sir,
That's it.
have you done research po?
Yes, of course, I've done research, right? Most of the time, most of the research that I have conducted is on a hospital setting as part of our developmental plan is to do research and during those times that I've been practicing in the hospital. But when I have shifted my profession from clinical or from hospital to academe, I haven't had any research at all except dun sa postgrad, except that when I'm accepting a particular advisor's role as part of the graduate school professor. So those are the things that has prompted me, or that has made me again recall research in.
Sir, if you can
Those
remember,
practices.
how many research na po yung nagawa niyo so far?
So not nagawa, but I have
yes.
advised several researches during those times. Since 2020, I have had at least a couple of more than 8 researches so far. But not that as much. Because yun nga, hindi ako nakakapag-practice ng research during those last year, and since that I accepted the position of full-time professor in the undergrad. But during the graduate school consulting and advising scheme, meron po akong ina-advise ng mga estudyante. Alright. Yun lang.
Sir, among those research po, parang ano po doon yung masasabi niyong pinaka-favorite niyo na tumatak po sa inyo?
Well, one of my favorite research is all about the management and leadership role in a particular organization. This was way back when I was still practicing sa hospital. So, yun po yung pinaka-favorite na tumatak sa akin. Since my craft is all about leadership and management. So, it's all about practicing the principle of leadership, translating it into practice, from research to practice.
Next question po. What do you think are the necessary skills that novice researcher should possess?
Characteristics and necessary
Yes,
skills.
yes.
So, syempre, diba, one thing is you have to have an inquisitive mind. So, when we talk about inquisitive mind, you're curious about what will happen to a particular phenomenon, what will be the outcome of that. And of course, you have to have an extensive knowledge on how to pull up resources such as your related learning literature. All right, those are very important if you're gonna conduct research. And of course, you have to have a very strong background in the practice of EBP. what do you mean by EBP? So, I have taught you na the EBP, di ba? The evidence-based practice. Yung EBP po, kasi it should be integrated in the research also. It's not separate entity. Your evidence-based practice should what? Should be given emphasis when you're conducting research. Diba? Another thing is that you have to have the know-hows of calculation or application of statistical treatment into your data because that's necessary for your data gathering and analysis. You have to know the basic of your, such as yung mga mean, median modes, the central tendencies, as far as I know, your basic statistical requirement, you have to have a good grasp on that also. So, and of course, you know how to what? To scan the external and internal environment. The external meaning you have to have the capacity to analyze what's happening in your external environment and that would impact your research. And those are your PEST, your political, your economic, your social, and your technological thing that could impact your performance or that could impact your research. And of course, your internal also. What's happening within your internal environment. If you're in the school, what's happening within your institution, for example, PWU, okay, and other universities. So as a student, I think that those are the most essential part that a researcher should have.
Follow-up lang po. Ano po yung among the skills you've mentioned, which is the most important?
The most important for me is you have to know how to analyze, right? The analytical part of it. So, given that you know how to statistically treat the data, right, it is very imperative that what the result of the numbers specific to quantitative research, the result of those numbers should translate into a better or good analysis. If you don't know how to analyze it, then what's the use of it? Diba? So the result should translate into a good analysis, and therefore those analysis would help us to what? To improve something, right? That would be beneficial in both the practice and the, like for example, the 4 domains of nursing practice, like yung education, the administrative part of it. Yung tinuro ko sa inyo sa nursing informatics, the administrative part, the domains, the education part or the academic, the next is your clinical and the researchers. So the analysis as the most important thing for me.
So for the next question, sir, how can they acquire these skills po, and what do they need to do to acquire those?
Of course, you have to what? You have to have a certain practice for that, because in order for you to what? To master a particular set of skills, it doesn't only skills. It doesn't only focuses on skills, but you have to have a good knowledge. First is you have to acquire it to a formal education, to a structured learning program. That's why you have a research and methodology subject or research subject to give you what? The proper ammunition for you to become a better researcher, and you will practice it from time to time. You have from one area to the other area, and your practice makes you a better one, diba? If maraming researches na pwede kayong mag-participate, you participate in many researches. That's how you hone your skills and the knowledge. That's it.
Okay, sir. So, for the follow-up question po, do you think theoretical knowledge is more valuable than hands-on experience in
So,
research?
you cannot separate those things from each other. The theoretical should what? Translate into practice. Even if, di ba, sabi nga nila, importante yung practice, di ba, for me. But you cannot practice without the knowledge, the theoretical thing. That's why nga, di ba, sabi ko sa inyo, Hindi pwedeng pag-separate nyo ang lecture sa RLE. Both should go hand in hand. So, diba, if you're passing the lecture, you also pass the RLE because it's very imperative. Ganun din sa research. Diba? May theory ka, may know-how ka. Diba? Pero kailangan i-practice mo siya. The result of that, sinabi ko na kanina, should translate into a better outcome, should translate into something that is very beneficial to humanity. Alright.
Okay, sir. Next question, sir. Can you suggest po 2 topics for a research study that we
So
can have?
what do you mean by 2 topics per research study? What do you want to focus on to?
Siguro po when it comes to sa isa pong clinical, sa mismong hospital, and isa rin pong for
Yeah. So if I'm gonna suggest a particular topic, you focus on the readiness of the newly graduate students in the clinical setup. So how do you measure the readiness of that particular, are they ready to accept the challenge to work as a clinician? What's the level of their readiness? Di ba pagka-graduate nyo, are you ready? So that's interesting, right?
Yes, sir.
So, another thing in terms of academe, I want you to measure the students' emotional capacity to handle educational burdens. Are you emotionally prepared for the nitty-gritty of your academic course? Diba? Because I have seen that. Because I have seen that in each and every one of you who's walking along the aisle of PWU, who has been my student, and I can say that some of the students is not emotionally not prepared for that. So I want you to look onto the emotional stability of an individual. Diba? How stable are they? And also include the intellectual capacity both. If you can measure the readiness of a particular student from first year, so your subject would be your first year. So you look onto their emotional and their intellectual capacity to sustain the nitty-gritty of the academic requirements. So those are the things that I want you to look on to. So if it's not too much on your part.
Next question po. What common mistakes do novice researchers make and how they can avoid them?
Novice
researcher. So I think the mistake that they have is yung pagiging bias. Sometimes you have to look onto the validity and reliability also of if like for example, if you're having a test question, you have to test for reliability and validity, and you should be able to know kung bias na yung research nyo or not. Sometimes kasi, diba, may mga ethical considerations yan, diba? So sometimes you're violating ethical consideration also. Those are the common mistakes that they have. And you have to be very careful with that. It should be your research should be approved by the ERB. Diba? Sometimes kasi nagpo-proceed yung research without the approval of the authorities that's necessary. Another thing nga, yung bias, you have to look onto the bias of your research. Again, you have to also look for the reliability and validity of the questionnaires that you'll be administering to the respondents. So those are the things that common mistakes ng mga baguhang newbie, sabi nyo nga, that newbie researchers. So yun lang. Pero other than that, meron ba? And of course, yung mga technicalities also of writing. Siyempre, di ba, but those things can be improved. But siyempre, di ba, bilang baguhan, you're vulnerable for that. The violation of the technicalities, the requirement of the institution. Yung mga ganun. So, are you using the IMRAD format?
Yes,
For the next question po, what is the most difficult part of the research process? What do you think is the most difficult part of the research process for us students po?
So, the most difficult part, I think it's the approval of the ERB. Kasi it will be taking some of your time, and by this particular time, if you know your research very well, you really have to prepare for that because marami po ang nagpapa-approve sa ERB. So the approval of the ERB, the most difficult part also is what? Is your, the collating of your the data also, the data gathering. So if you're doing a quantitative, be it quantitative or qualitative, it's the data gathering. So for quanti, it's very difficult to conduct an interview, diba? To set time, diba? The readiness of your respondents. So yun naman sa quanti naman, if you're targeting a specific number, right? And of course, you have to know how to compute for that. You use the Slovin's formula to determine the number of respondents. Baka hindi rin yung ano yun for some reason. So those are, I think, the most difficult part of conducting research. Data gathering and the approval of the necessary requirements by ERB. Kasi medyo matagal. Okay.
Next po, how you guide students in presenting the research, and in what ways do you provide feedback to your research students?
Well, there are several ways on how you can help those students, alright, research. First is you really have to guide them. So when you guide them, hindi ibig sabihin nun, ikaw yung magsusulat ng research para sa kanila.
Yes.
Because guiding is different from writing, diba? The entire thesis or the entire research. When you guide your student, you show them the step-by-step way of what? Achieving and arriving to the end result, diba? And in doing so, from time to time, you have to schedule a consultation time for them. Make yourself available. Me, myself, should make myself available if you're going to teach your student. Number 2 is what? So, augment their knowledge. What's the knowledge that they have acquired during your lecture series? Diba? If they lack in something else, you give them a quite informative and kumbaga practice, like for example some of the statistical treatment that you can use, some of the analysis, how do you analyze things, because dyan medyo nahihirapan ng estudyante in the analysis and interpretation because hindi lang numbers ang kinukompute mo. With a particular number, meron ka ukulang interpretation. So sometimes, diba, you need the guidance of a statistician. Di po ba? And aside from that, guide them in the formulation of your recommendation also, because when you analyze it, you have the portion there, recommendation. In the recommendation kasi, that is how you operationalize what has been the result of your research. So yun po yung nakikita ko na dapat nabigyan ng emphasis ng isang teacher, ng isang professional advisor in a particular thesis or research endeavor. That's it.
Sir, last question na po. What is your advice po to newbies or yung mga beginner researchers that will just begin their research po like us po?
Just don't be afraid to explore things. Don't be afraid. If you think this particular research has a merit and shall benefit majority of the people, then proceed with the research. Even if marami mga obstacles, and just be resilient enough to continue those research that you started on to. Huwag pa bago-bago po kasi 'di ba minsan pag naka-encounter na kayo ng medyo mahirap, you tend to quit. So, 'di ba, pag nagre-research ka, 'di ba, karamihan sa mga researcher kasi masikhay, masipag, masikap. Kumbaga parang andun yung in pursuit of what do they want to look onto in the future. That's how research is all about. It's about having an inquisitive mind. And the audacity to pursue that is what I've been looking for. Even if mahirap, right? Wala namang research na madali, di ba? Sabi ko nga sa inyo, there's no such thing as easy thing in this world. Everything is what? has the price to pay for. Diba? May pressure lahat. Diba? Gusto nyo ng mataas na grade, di mag-aral kayo. Right? Hindi naman pwedeng bibigyan kita ng unong. Hindi ka naman nag-aaral. Hindi pwede yun. That's it. That's it. Thank you.